My name is John Kittmer. The object I've chosen is a large marble sculpture located in the north transept of Westminster Abbey in London. Done by Sir Francis Chantrey, the leading portrait sculptor of the early 19th century, it represents Prime Minister George Canning, who's buried close by. The statue of Canning forms 1/3 of what we might call the Abbey's Canning Corner. Next to it are statues of George Canning's son Charles, the first British Viceroy of India, and George's cousin, Stratford, one of the greatest diplomats of the Victorian age and long-time ambassador to Turkey. It's a powerful assembly. The statue of George Canning is distinctive. He's represented as a statesman, orator, and intellectual. He wears a cloak and is bearing a scroll with books piled at his feet. He has an intense, somewhat quizzical expression. The citizens of Athens and of Liverpool, where he was the Member of Parliament, are as familiar with this statue as are worshippers in the Abbey. Sir Francis Chantrey made 2 further copies of his statue of George Canning. One stands in Liverpool Town Hall, the other is in Canning Square, Platia Canningos, in central Athens. There's a further statue of Canning, a monumental bronze in a very different style by Richard Westmacott, on the northwest corner of Parliament Square in London. The pedestal on which the Abbey's statue of George Canning stands has a fine epitaph. It reads as follows: George Canning, born the 11th of April 1770, died the 8th of August 1827. Endowed with a rare combination of talents, an eminent statesman, an accomplished scholar, an orator surpassed by none, he united the most brilliant and lofty qualities of the mind with the warmest affections of the heart. Raised by his own merit, he successively filled important offices of state and finally became First Minister of the Crown. In the full enjoyment of his sovereign's favour and of the confidence of the people, he was prematurely cut off when pursuing a wise and enlarged course of policy which had for its object the prosperity and greatness of his own country, while it comprehended the welfare and commanded the admiration of foreign nations. This monument is erected by his friends and countrymen. In this year, of all years, Greeks and Philhellenes everywhere should be paying our respects to the memory of George Canning at his tomb and the several statues to him. Lord Byron may be the name that set the cause of international Philhellenism ablaze through his poetry and his untimely death at Missolonghi, but no foreign statesman, not even, in my view, Kapodistrias, did more than George Canning to ensure the ultimate success of the Greek Revolution. So, briefly, what was this wise and enlarged policy of Canning's that pursued the prosperity of Britain while also commanding the admiration of foreign nations, not least the Greek nation? Before becoming Prime Minister in 1827, Canning had 2 periods in office as Foreign Secretary, first in 1807 to 1809 during the Napoleonic Wars, then from 1822 to 1827. In this second period, he set the course of British foreign policy towards the Greek revolutionaries. In Lord Liverpool's Tory cabinet, he was one of the few ministers who was not a committed Turkophile. Canning was a liberal Tory. He knew Byron well, and Byron approved of him. As Foreign Secretary at this critical time, he pursued a very subtle policy. He protected British interests by frustrating Russian aims to dismantle the Ottoman Empire and to control Constantinople for itself, and by fracturing the so-called Neo-Holy Alliance of ultra-conservative and autocratic European states formed in the aftermath of Waterloo. But he also made gestures of openness towards the Greek revolutionaries. In 1823, he was the first statesman to recognise the Greek insurgents as belligerents, refusing to treat them as mere pirates. While he had British officers who volunteered for service in Greece struck off the active service list, he didn't prevent such officers from leaving England. he then successfully resisted Russian attempts to use the Congress system to bring the great powers together to make war on Turkey and to balkanize Greek territory under Russian sovereignty, a Russian policy that had outraged the Greek revolutionaries. In December 1824, he responded to Greek attempts to engage Britain in the war, maintaining British neutrality but offering mediation between Turkey and Greece. After Ibrahim Pasha's devastating Peloponnesian campaigns of 1825, with the threat that the Morea would be depopulated of its Greek inhabitants and resettled, Canning met the Greek delegation that went to London in October of that year, seeking British protection. Empowered by the Greeks themselves, Canning was now in a very strong position to act. He now brought Russia brilliantly into a new alliance through the Protocol of St. Petersburg in April 1826, under which both powers disclaimed any territorial ambitions of their own against Turkey, but envisaged a limited form of Greek emancipation and Allied intervention if Ibrahim pursued his apparent depopulation policy. Negotiations with Paris in the ensuing months brought France into the plan. On the 6th of July 1827, the Treaty of London was signed by Russia, France and Great Britain. Canning was now British Prime Minister. The treaty the powers signed demanded an armistice. It envisaged a Greek state that was formally a tributary of the Ottomans, but internally free of Ottoman control and able to carry out its own affairs. The treaty pledged negotiations between the three powers and the Ottomans. It stressed that the signatories had no territorial ambitions of their own. A secret article, agreed at Russian request, pledged that the three powers would interpose themselves between the Greeks and the Turks, if necessary, to prevent collisions. It's the Treaty of London that empowered Admiral Sir Edward Codrington and his allied fleet of British, French and Russian sailors to intercept and impede and ultimately, at Navarino Bay on the 20th of October 1827, to destroy Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptian-Ottoman fleet. 1 month after the signature of the Treaty of London, and 2 months before the Battle of Navarino, Canning was dead, of natural causes. He died tragically young, and didn't see the successful conclusion of his policy, but he would have been pleased. In the words of Harold Temperley, the great historian and biographer of Canning, "It is certain that Canning had decided to protect Greece against Turkish oppression, that he contemplated her independence as possible, and that, but for him, there would have been no intervention." Some have held that it was Byron, others that it was Codrington who liberated Greece. Yet there are some, and among these be the Turks, who say that the two Cannings, George and Stratford, were the men who tore Greece from their grasp. The words of Harold Temperley. Well, in this year we're celebrating the bicentenary of the Greek Revolution, launched and prosecuted by the Greeks themselves. Greek independence is a Greek achievement, but let us not forget the decisive role played by the great British statesman George Canning. Thank you.